On a frozen Montana night, Ranger Claire Donovan thought it was just another patrol across Timberline Bridge. But beneath the storm, she found a shivering old veteran clutching a wooden sign, "Horse for sale, $50." At his side stood a scarred black stallion, proud and unyielding, far too loyal to be sold. What began as a strange encounter in the snow would unravel into something far darker. A dying promise, a child in danger, and a truth powerful enough to shatter the silence of Timberline forever. The winter in Montana had a way of pressing itself against the skin, of cutting through every layer of wool and leather as though the cold were a living thing determined to leave its mark. Snow had fallen steadily for 3 days, burying fences and mailboxes, swallowing parked cars until only their roofs peaked above white drifts. The small town of Timberline, already remote and almost forgotten, lay wrapped in this storm, as if the mountains themselves had decided to close their jaws around it. Timberline was not much to speak of on a map. A cluster of wooden houses with peeling paint. A diner that had been running on the same neon sign since 1967. A sheriff station with 3 desks and a general store that smelled perpetually of coffee grounds and oiled wood. But in winter it transformed. The few lights that glowed in the windows at night looked fragile, almost defiant against the immensity of snow and sky. Streets narrowed into white corridors, muffled and deserted, as though the town had been abandoned. Even the dogs that usually barked from porches had vanished indoors, leaving the silence to deepen. The wind was the only sound. It came off the peaks in long serrated gusts, carrying with it the sting of ice crystals that bit any exposed skin. To the people of Timberline, this was ordinary. Winter here had always been merciless, but tonight something about the silence felt different. It was not just emptiness, it was expectation, the hush before a secret was spoken aloud. At the northern edge of town, where the river cut its way through a gorge before winding into the forest, stood the Timberline Bridge. It was an old wooden span built decades earlier when money had been scarce and steel scarcer still. The planks bowed under the weight of passing trucks, and the support beams groaned like old men in their sleep. Most avoided it after dark, especially in storms like this. Legends clung to the bridge like frost. Parents warned their children not to linger there, whispering about bootleggers during Prohibition who had used it as their route. Others spoke of smugglers more recently, men who moved things across state lines without wanting questions asked. A few recalled disappearances, though no one could prove the bridge had anything to do with them. Still, the stories persisted, thickening with each retelling, until the place was less a structure of timber and nails than a boundary between the safe and the perilous. Tonight the bridge looked skeletal, its frame coated in ice, every nail head sparkling under the pale wash of moonlight. The river below had frozen solid, its surface cracked with black veins that stretched like spiderwebs across the white. When the wind surged, it slid under the ice and forced a groan from the riverbed, a low, hollow sound that seemed to come from beneath the earth itself. It was no wonder the locals called it the border of secrets. Anyone crossing at night felt as though they were trespassing into some other, more dangerous world. Through this storm strode Claire Donovan. She was 33, a ranger by profession, though to most she was simply the Donovan girl who had grown up in the forest and never really left it. Her figure cut a resolute shape against the swirling snow, medium height, shoulders squared, her body honed from years of trekking steep trails and hauling supplies across terrain that didn't forgive weakness. She wore her ranger's winter coat, olive green and lined with heavy wool, the badge on her shoulder glinting faintly whenever her flashlight beam swung across it. The hood was pulled tight, but strands of dark hair had escaped to whip against her cheek. Each breath she drew burst into the air as a cloud of white vapor that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Her boots crunched rhythmically over the snow, leaving a trail of neat impressions behind her. She moved with the kind of economy that came from long habit. Eyes scanning, ears tuned to the smallest disruption, every sense sharpened by both training and instinct. At her hip hung a holstered sidearm, though she carried it more for the unpredictable humans who wandered Timberline's forests than the wildlife. Her truck was parked at the head of the bridge, engine idling low. She had chosen to leave it behind, preferring to cross on foot. Machines were blind and deaf in storms like this. She trusted her own vigilance more. As she stepped onto the first plank of the bridge, the timber gave its familiar, protesting groan. Claire's grip on the flashlight tightened, but her stride did not falter. She was used to this sound. She had heard it since childhood. It was in these woods that she had learned to listen, to hear the difference between a branch snapping under a deer's hoof and one snapping under a man's boot, to smell the faint trace of wood smoke miles away, to read tracks half buried under new snow. It was here that her father had raised her, teaching her what it meant to respect the wilderness. He had been a ranger too, broad-shouldered and patient, with a voice that carried calm into the worst tempests. But he had not come back from one of them. Claire had been 15 when the news reached her. A blizzard, a lost group of hikers, her father going out with rope and gear, refusing to wait until conditions improved. He had found them. They told her he had tied them together, led them down the ridge. They survived. He did not. His body was discovered days later, half buried, still facing uphill, as though he had been searching for one last way forward. The hole his absence left never truly closed. Claire had chosen to step into his path, to wear the same badge, to walk the same trails. Some said it was duty, others said stubbornness. Claire knew it was both, but also something harder to name, a refusal to let his sacrifice be the end of the Donovan line in Timberline's woods. If the mountains had taken him, she would remain to guard the living from them. Over the years, she had become a fixture of the region, the ranger who was always on patrol, who never backed down when poachers showed up with rifles, who trudged into storms when most huddled by their stoves. She carried herself with quiet authority, but there was a solitude to her that people noticed. She laughed rarely, lived alone in a small cabin near the tree line. And when conversation turned to family, she would steer it elsewhere with a polite firmness. Beneath the steel of her discipline lay a softer truth. She was afraid not of the wilderness, but of loss. She feared that to let anyone too close was to risk watching them disappear into the snow as her father had. And so she gave her loyalty to the forest itself, to the animals that roamed it, to the people she was sworn to protect in it, because that loyalty was simpler. It asked no promises she couldn't keep. Now, standing in the middle of the timberline bridge, she felt the weight of that solitude more acutely than usual. The storm pressed in around her, muting the world to a grey blur. The planks shuddered under each gust, and the railings were rimed with jagged icicles that clinked faintly against one another like fragile chimes. She paused, letting her flashlight sweep the expanse. No headlights glowed on the road, no footprints marked the fresh snow. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. The only sounds were the wail of the wind and the occasional crack from the ice below. Claire's instincts prickled. In a town like Timberline, instincts mattered more than gossip. They had kept her alive through storms and encounters with men desperate enough to kill. Something was off tonight. She couldn't have said what, not yet. But the silence wasn't natural. It was waiting. Claire shifted her stance, her breath steaming harder. She adjusted her grip on the flashlight, let her other hand rest near the holster at her hip. The beam sliced across the empty expanse of the bridge, across the skeletal timbers and the black veins in the ice below. Nothing. Yet the unease thickened inside her chest. She knew this feeling. It had visited her before, the moment before a tree snapped in high wind, before a bear lunged from the brush, before a stranger reached for something concealed in his jacket. It was the body's way of whispering what the eyes could not yet see. Claire exhaled slowly, her storm-grey eyes narrowing as she studied the far end of the bridge. She could not shake the certainty that something, or someone, was about to emerge from the swirling snow. The wind rose in another furious sweep as Claire steadied herself in the middle of the bridge. Her flashlight trembled across the drifting sheets of snow, painting the storm in pale arcs. For a long moment, she thought the blizzard was playing tricks on her eyes. Then, through the shifting veil of white, a darker shape resolved, faint at first, then undeniable. A figure moved against the storm, hunched, frail, stumbling, as if each gust might snap him from the planks. His coat hung loose and tattered, flapping wildly, more threadbare cloth than true protection. Snow crusted on his bent shoulders, gathered in the creases of his hood, and his legs shook with the effort of each step. He looked less like a man than a shadow carved from the storm itself, wandering where no one should have been at this hour. Beside him walked something larger, heavier. For a heartbeat, Claire thought it was another man, cloaked and slouched, until the beam caught the sweep of a mane. A horse, black, or at least dark enough that the snow turned its body into a stark silhouette. The animal trudged steadily, head low against the gale, breath streaming from flared nostrils in ghostly bursts. Across its broad shoulder, the light caught on a pale ridge that cut through the coat. A scar deep and long-heeled, but unmistakable even under winter's shroud. The two of them appeared in her flashlight's circle like apparitions summoned from some forgotten battlefield. An old man and a scarred horse moving together through the blizzard, as though the storm could not separate them. Claire's hand tightened on the flashlight. She had expected silence, maybe emptiness, maybe the faint cry of coyotes from across the frozen river. Not this. The man's head lifted as though the weight of her gaze had touched him. He squinted against the beam, his face gaunt, half hidden by a hood stiff with frost. In his hands, clasped close to his chest, he carried something rectangular. For a moment, Claire thought it was a piece of scrap wood for a fire, scavenged in desperation. Then the light revealed crude letters, burned or scratched across the board. Horse for sale, $50. The words leapt at her with such absurd clarity that she stopped cold. Her boots scraped against the ice, echoing louder than she meant them to. She lowered the beam slightly, blinking against the rush of snow, as if the sign might dissolve back into shadow if she looked twice. But it didn't. The board trembled in the man's grip, the message plain, even in the half-light. A horse for sale for $50. Here, on Timberline Bridge, in the teeth of a blizzard at midnight. It was such a collision of worlds, something that might have belonged in a dusty frontier town a century ago, dragged brutally into the present night, that Claire felt a prickle of unease crawl down her neck. "Sir," she called, pitching her voice above the wind. The man startled. His arms tightened around the board, pulling it closer as though afraid she might rip it away. Slowly, he straightened. As she closed the distance, his features came into sharper relief. 70, maybe older. The lines etched in his face were not merely from age, but from long seasons of hardship. Cheeks hollowed, skin weathered like leather, lips cracked raw by cold. Strands of white hair clung damply to his forehead, escaping the rim of his hood. Around his neck, half hidden by layers of scarf and threadbare coat, gleamed the dull metal of a chain. Dog tags, faded edges, worn smooth, the imprint of service long past. Her chest tightened. She had seen enough veterans around Timberline to recognize the air that lingered on them. Pride muted by years, discipline eroded by hunger, but something hard still burning deep inside. He met her gaze with eyes clouded by age, yet strangely unyielding. They carried the weight of someone who had once commanded himself through fire and steel and had never entirely laid it down. "I'm Samuel Carter," he rasped, his voice thin but carrying a rasp of authority. "Don't come closer if you mean to stop me." Claire's breath fogged in the air. She said nothing at first, studying him. His hands shook violently, but not from fear, rather from the cold, gnawing at his bones. His boots were scuffed, cracked open at the seams. The scarf at his throat was more holes than cloth. Everything about him screamed exhaustion. Yet beneath the tremors he stood with a strange dignity, spine refusing to buckle more than time already had. And then there was the horse. The creature towered beside the man, posture starkly at odds with his master's frailty. Snow clung to the beast's dark coat, outlining the curve of powerful muscles that had not yet wasted. Its mane tossed in ragged knots, but the eyes, when the beam caught them, glowed steady and alive, not dulled, not broken. Deep amber rimmed with frost, yet brimming with alertness. The scar across its left shoulder was ugly, a ridge of twisted flesh that split the otherwise sleek hide. It was the kind of wound Claire had seen on men more than once, torn by shrapnel or blade. Survived but carried forever. She had no way of knowing where the horse had earned it, but instinct told her it had not been in peace. This was not a farm animal gone astray. This was a soldier's companion, one that had seen violence and endured. The horse, Shadowmane she would later learn, stood planted firmly at Samuel's side, head held high, breath steaming in rhythm with his master's. It gave no hint of panic, no restless pawing, only a steady defiance against the storm. To Claire it felt as though the animal were more sentinel than steed, guarding the man even as the man clung to his desperate sign. Her throat tightened with unease. A horse like that was not meant to be sold. "Sir," she said again, more softly this time, "why are you here? Why now?" Samuel's fingers dug into the edge of the board. He looked down at the letters as if they could explain for him, then back up at her. His voice cracked, thin as paper. "I need to sell him. $50. Enough to buy medicine for Anna." The words fell into the storm with a weight she hadn't expected. "Anna?" she asked carefully. His gaze wavered, then lowered, his chin dipping into the scarf. A breath rattled through him. "My granddaughter, 12 years old. Her lungs weak since birth. She can't stop coughing. This winter's colder than the rest." The doctor said medicine, but his hands spasmed around the board. "I have nothing left to pay with." He glanced at the horse, then away again, shame written in every crease of his face. "So I bring him here, hoping someone might give $50. Claire stood stunned, her breath shallow against the cold air. Behind him, Shadowmane shifted, suddenly stamping a hoof against the planks with a resonant crack. A low sound rose from its chest, not a whinny exactly, but something that carried the cadence of protest. The animal's ears flicked back, head tossing once, as though in refusal of the bargain. Samuel flinched at the sound, shame burning across his expression. He held the sign tighter, but his shoulders sagged, as if the weight of the truth pressed them down. Claire felt a hard knot twist inside her. She watched the trembling hands, the snow melting into water across the wooden sign, smudging the letters. She watched the gaunt figure bent by both years and desperation. And she watched the horse, proud even in its scars, refusing to bow to the cold or the absurdity of the situation. The scene clawed open something raw inside her chest. For a moment, she was a teenager again, standing by the window of her childhood home, waiting for a father who would never return. She saw the same desperation in Samuel's eyes that she had seen in her mother's when the telegram came. The same grief carved deep, the same refusal to yield despite the hollow in the heart. Her father had died trying to save strangers, and here was another man prepared to sell the one loyal companion left to him because love for his granddaughter demanded it. Her hand clenched around the flashlight until her knuckles ached. This wasn't simply poverty, it wasn't madness. It was the kind of corner life forced people into when it wanted to break them. She knew it. She had felt it. Claire exhaled, her decision solidifying in that cold circle of lamplight. Slowly, she reached inside her coat. The leather wallet was old, softened at the folds from years of use, carrying receipts, a faded photograph of her father, and the few bills she usually tucked away for emergencies. Tonight, only one remained of real worth. She drew out a single folded note. $50. The bill crackled faintly in the wind as she pinched it between gloved fingers. She stared at it for a long moment before lifting her gaze to Samuel. His eyes followed her hand, disbelief flickering across them. "I'll give you this," she said, her voice steady, though the storm tried to tear it apart. She extended the bill, her arm cutting a line between them. "But understand me, Samuel. I'm not buying your horse. I don't want him. I just don't want to see you standing here trying to sell the one thing that should never be sold." The old man blinked, as if the words themselves had stunned him more than the money. His fingers twitched around the wooden board. He looked from the bill to Claire's face, then back again, his lips parting soundlessly. For an instant he didn't move. Then, with a trembling hesitation, his hand crept forward, uncertain, like a man reaching for something forbidden. His glove brushed against the paper, withdrew, touched again, finally curling around the note. The money rustled softly as it passed into his grip. His body shook harder than before, and Claire couldn't tell if it was from the cold or from some emotion clawing its way out of him. He stared at the bill resting in his palm, the green ink already smudging faintly with melted snow. His breath stuttered, chest rising and falling. "I," he whispered. The word broke apart in his throat. He cleared it, then tried again. I don't know if I should thank you or curse you for kindness I can't repay." His voice cracked into the storm. Claire held his gaze, firm but not unkind. "I told you it's not about the horse. He's yours. Maybe even your granddaughter's too. That's not for me to take." Samuel's head jerked up, eyes wide, wet not from snow alone, but from something deeper that threatened to spill. Shame, yes, but also a strange, fragile relief, as though a weight long pressed into his shoulders had shifted, if only slightly. "You truly don't want him?" His voice was raw disbelief woven into each syllable. "No," Claire said, sharper now to leave no doubt. She gestured toward the animal standing tall against the snow. "He belongs here, with you, with her. Not with me, not with anyone else." Samuel's lips trembled around words he couldn't form. He clutched the bill to his chest, bowing his head as though the storm itself had finally humbled him. His entire frame sagged, the board slipping from his other hand to clatter against the icy planks. At that moment, Shadowmane struck the ground with one heavy hoof. The sound reverberated through the bridge like the crack of a drum, deep and resonant, echoing against the frozen river below. The horse's amber eyes locked on Claire, flaring with an intensity that stopped her breath short. He tossed his head, mane snapping in the gale, nostrils flaring wide. Steam burst from his lungs, curling into the air like smoke from a battle flag. And for an instant, a fleeting, impossible instant, Claire felt as though the animal understood, as if her refusal to sever him from his master was heard and honored. A shiver crawled across her arms, not from the cold, but from the uncanny weight of that gaze. It was not the blank stare of livestock. It was something older, something forged in the fires of loyalty and war. Samuel looked up, startled by the sound. His mouth opened, closed again. His eyes darted from Shadowmane to Claire, confusion giving way to a fragile recognition. The three of them stood there, suspended in the storm, the ranger, the veteran, and the scarred stallion. No words passed, yet meaning stretched thick across the silence. Claire's heart thudded hard against her ribs. For the first time in months, perhaps years, she felt the threads of something binding her to another life, another struggle. Samuel's despair mirrored the grief she carried from her father's death. Shadowmane's scars reflected her own unseen ones. They were not strangers, not in the ways that mattered. They were survivors who had lost much, yet still stood defiant against the storm. Samuel's voice broke through at last, low and frayed. "You," his throat worked before he managed the rest. "You have the eyes of someone who's lost before, lost more than once. Maybe. Maybe the Lord sent you across this bridge tonight. Maybe not for me, but for her." Claire didn't answer. Words felt too heavy, too hollow. Instead, she bent, picked up the fallen sign from the planks. The wood was damp and the letters half blurred by snow. She brushed a glove across it, then lowered it gently back into Samuel's hands. But as she did, the wind rose, tearing the board's weight from his grip. The sign tumbled across the planks, sliding until it struck the railing. Snowflakes piled on it, instantly softening the crude letters until they almost disappeared. She let it stay there, half buried. Better that way. Her gaze lingered on the fading words, "Horse for sale 50, before she turned back to the old man. "A loyal horse isn't meant to be sold," she murmured, more to herself than him. "And a desperate grandfather isn't meant to be left standing alone." The words hung between them, carried away in pieces by the storm. For a while neither moved. Only the groan of the bridge and the whistle of the wind filled the silence. Samuel clutched the bill tight, his eyes lowered in thought. Shadowmane's ears twitched, swiveling sharply, as though catching sounds the humans could not hear. His head lifted, nostrils flaring toward the tree line beyond the bridge. Claire's pulse quickened. The animal's tension was palpable, vibrating through the air. She scanned the darkness instinctively. Nothing stirred beyond the edge of her flashlight's reach, only the storm, endless and shifting. Yet unease crawled over her skin. The bridge groaned again, louder this time, its old timbers wailing like a warning. Claire drew a steadying breath. Something about this night felt wrong in ways her instincts could not yet name. A man, a horse, a desperate plea for $50. That was the surface, but beneath it she could feel the weight of something else, something moving like a shadow under the ice of the river. She tightened her grip on the flashlight, her free hand drifting toward the holster at her hip. The storm howled. Samuel lowered his head, clutching the money as if it were both salvation and curse. Shadowmane remained rigid, ears flicking, body drawn like a bowstring, amber eyes fixed on the unseen depths of the forest. Claire swallowed hard. This night was not finished, not by a long stretch. The truck's heater whined against the cold, filling the cab with a faint hum that felt almost fragile compared to the storm outside. Snow flung itself across the windshield, sliding in streaks down the glass before the wipers cleared them away with mechanical persistence. Claire kept both hands firm on the wheel, guiding the pickup carefully along the snow-buried road that wound through Timberline's frozen woods. Samuel sat hunched in the passenger seat, his thin frame swallowed by the bulky outline of his ragged coat. He pressed his back to the seat, but seemed restless, his body unable to find warmth or ease. The board, with its crude scrawl, lay discarded in the truck bed, half buried beneath drifting snow that had blown in before she slammed the tailgate shut. For a long time, neither spoke. Only the steady growl of the engine and the hiss of tires over packed ice filled the silence. Then Samuel's hand moved, trembling, and rose to his chest. He held it there, against the old dog tags that clinked faintly under his sweater. The gesture wasn't casual. It was as if he clutched them to remind himself he was still tethered to something solid. His breath rattled before words forced their way out. "You know," he began, voice fragile, "I've seen them. The men under the bridge." Claire's eyes flicked from the road to him, then back again. Her grip on the wheel tightened. "What men?" He swallowed, Adam's apple bobbing against his scarf. His gaze drifted out the window, past the curtain of snow, as though afraid the answer might appear in the darkness. "Big crates," he whispered. "Wooden, heavy. Not timber, no. Too heavy, too careful the way they moved them. At night, quiet as ghosts. But I saw enough to know." Her heart thudded once, hard. She shifted her grip on the wheel. "You're saying smugglers?" Samuel's hand shook where it rested on his chest. He shook his head, not in denial, but in dread. "Smugglers, yes. But worse, I think, weapons. Or something just as deadly. You don't guard regular lumber with rifles. You don't watch the shadows like that unless you're hiding more than wood." His voice cracked, a rasp eaten by years of silence. "If they knew I'd seen—" He trailed off, his throat working. Anna. She'd have no chance. Claire's jaw locked. The headlights cut through the storm, throwing a tunnel of light ahead of them. But her vision tunneled further inward. Weapons smuggling, a sick granddaughter left in the care of a man too old to fight shadows this dark. This wasn't just a sad story about a horse and an old soldier. It was a thread tangled in something bigger, something dangerous. Samuel turned his head, and in the dim dashboard glow she caught his eyes. Faded, weary, yet burning with a desperate plea. "I don't care what happens to me," he said. "I've had my war. But Anna, she's all I have left. Lost her mother before she could speak. Never knew her father. I've done my best, but—" His lips trembled, the words almost breaking. "I won't be here much longer. And if those men come looking, she won't survive it." The pickup jolted over a frozen rut. Claire steadied the wheel, her pulse sharp and insistent. She inhaled slowly, forcing her voice steady. "I'll protect her," she said. Each word landed like a stake driven into stone. "I promise you, Samuel. Whatever happens, Anna will be safe." His shoulders sagged, the fight draining from him. A long, shuddering sigh escaped his chest, curling white in the cold air. He closed his eyes, fingers still pressed to his dog tags, and for the first time since she had found him on that bridge, he looked almost at peace. The road unspooled before them in silence, winding toward Timberline's edge. They rolled into the glow of a gas station, one of the few left open after midnight in this forgotten stretch of Montana. The fluorescent lights above the pumps flickered weakly, buzzing in the hush of the storm. The sign out front squeaked as the wind shook it, its faded paint promising snacks and hardware no one wanted at this hour. Claire pulled the truck to a stop near the storefront. The building's windows cast a yellow haze across the snow, a small oasis of warmth against the frozen dark. She shifted into park and cut the engine. "I'll grab some medicine," she told him. "Cold relief, something to ease that cough of yours. Maybe soup. Won't be long." Samuel nodded faintly. His lips twitched into a shadow of a smile. "I'll step out, stretch my legs. Been sitting too long." Claire hesitated, her instincts prickling, but his frailty was evident, his need for air plain. She studied him for a moment longer before giving a curt nod. "Stay close to the truck, don't wander." He gave a raspy chuckle, low and bitter. "Not much wandering left in me." She left the heater running low and stepped out, the wind knifing into her immediately. She pulled her hood tight and pushed through the door into the convenience store. Warmth struck her face, stinging as blood returned to skin, half numbed by cold. Behind her, Samuel shuffled beneath the awning, scarf pulled high, his breath rising in fragile puffs. He leaned against the post, staring into the storm as though the night itself whispered things only he could hear. For a brief, delicate moment, there was peace. The peace shattered. A gunshot cracked through the night, loud, violent, reverberating against the steel and glass of the station. Claire's head whipped around, heart slamming against her ribs. Through the pane of the door, she saw Samuel jerk, as though struck by a fist of iron. His chest snapped backward, his scarf blooming scarlet. He staggered, one hand clawing at the air, then crumpled into the snow. "Samuel!" Claire's scream tore from her throat as she shoved the door wide, boots slipping on the icy pavement. The cold slammed into her again, mingling with a metallic tang of blood carried on the wind. Her eyes scanned the street, searching desperately. A dark truck roared away into the storm, its tail lights glowing dim before the snow swallowed them whole. No license plate visible, no faces, only the echo of tires and the faint smear of diesel smoke. Shadowmane's screams split the night. The stallion reared against the hitch at the truck bed, front hooves striking the air. His cry was raw fury, reverberating off the empty buildings like thunder. He stomped the ground hard, muscles rippling, as though every nerve in him demanded pursuit. Claire skidded to Samuel's side, knees slamming into the frozen ground, her gloves pressed into snow, instantly stained red. "Stay with me," she pleaded, voice breaking. She tore open his coat, her hands searching in vain for the wound's source, but the blood was everywhere, pumping from his chest in shallow, desperate spurts. Samuel's eyes fluttered open, pale, glazed with pain, but still searching, still clinging to one last purpose. His trembling hand reached for his chest, fumbling. With effort that stole the last of his strength, he pulled free his dog tags and a small, creased photograph. The photo was nearly worn through at the edges, but even in the storm's dim light, Claire saw the image, a girl, perhaps 12, with bright eyes and a hesitant smile. He pressed them into her hand, his own smeared with blood. His lips moved, barely audible. She leaned closer, tears freezing against her lashes. "Promise." His voice rasped like dry leaves. "Don't let Anna disappear like me. Don't let them take her." His grip spasmed weakly around her wrist. "The horse. He knows the way." Her throat constricted. She seized his hand with both of hers, forcing her voice to hold steady. "I promise, Samuel. I swear on everything I am, I will protect her." His eyes, clouded and dimming, flickered with a last, fragile light. He gave the faintest nod, his lips quirking into something almost like a smile. Then the light guttered out. His hand slipped from hers. His chest rose one final time, then stilled. The storm howled louder, as though the world itself mourned. Claire knelt, frozen, the dog tags and photograph biting into her palm, his blood soaking through her gloves. Shadowmane stepped close, towering above her. He lowered his head until his breath steamed against her shoulder. His eyes, burning with both grief and something fiercely alive, locked onto hers. He stood still, no longer fighting the tether, no longer raging against the night. His vigil was quiet now, solemn, as if accepting the mantle Samuel had left behind. Claire bowed her head. The snow thickened, cloaking the crimson stain beneath her knees. Around them, the storm erased every trace of violence, but nothing could strip the weight from her chest. The vow she had made burned in her bones. Samuel Carter was gone, but Anna lived. And the horse, as he had said, knew the way. The road back to Timberline Bridge was a blur of snow and grief. Claire drove with both hands locked on the steering wheel, her jaw clenched so tight it ached. The heater rattled, but the cold still pressed through the cab, a merciless reminder of the emptiness beside her. The passenger seat, where Samuel had sat only an hour before, now seemed unbearable in its silence. She glanced at it once, quickly, then forced her eyes back to the road. The image of his body crumpled in the snow outside the gas station burned too raw in her mind. She gripped the wheel harder, as though tightening her hands around something she could control would keep the rest from unraveling. In the back, Shadowmane shifted. The stallion's massive frame made the truck bed creak with each movement, but he was calm now. Too calm. His head occasionally appeared in the rearview mirror, breath fogging the glass, his amber eyes locked with hers once, steady and unyielding. And in them she saw not panic, not confusion, just waiting, as if he too understood the path forward was not toward rest, but toward the bridge. By the time she pulled off the road and onto the familiar dirt track leading to Timberline Bridge, the storm had slackened. Snow still drifted in thin veils, but the wind no longer screamed through the trees. Instead, the night had fallen into a heavier stillness, darker than before, as though the forest itself were holding its breath. Claire cut the engine. The sudden silence rang louder than the motor ever had. She stepped out, boots sinking into fresh powder that swallowed sound. Her flashlight beam sliced through the gloom, catching the steel ribs of the old bridge as they glistened with frost. Shadowmane snorted, tossing his head as she untied him. His breath erupted in thick plumes, curling upward like smoke. When she placed a hand against his scarred shoulder, she felt the taut coil of muscle beneath. He was tense, watchful, but ready. Together they stepped onto the bridge. The planks groaned under their combined weight, their echoes vibrating into the frozen river below. Claire's light swept over the railings, the frost-laden timbers, the patches of ice that shimmered faintly under the beam. The air smelled of iron and cold water, sharp enough to sting the back of her throat. "This is where it begins," she whispered, though her words were lost in the night. At the riverbank beneath the bridge, her beam caught something more tangible. The snow was disrupted, gouged into ruts too deep to be left by mere foot traffic. She descended carefully down the slope, Shadowmane following with surprising ease for his size, hooves biting into the ice with a steady rhythm. Kneeling, Claire brushed snow aside with her glove. The grooves revealed themselves more clearly, parallel impressions carved deep into the frozen ground. Tire tracks, heavy ones. She leaned closer, letting the beam hover over the ice. The ridges were still sharp-edged, clean, not yet softened by snowfall. These hadn't been left days ago. Hours, maybe, perhaps even less. She exhaled slowly, watching her breath mingle with faint tendrils of smoke rising from the ruts. No, not smoke. She bent lower, inhaled cautiously. The bitter tang of burned rubber lingered, mixed with the metallic bite of hot steel cooled too quickly in the snow. Her chest tightened. Samuel had been telling the truth. Every word. She rose to her feet, scanning further down the bank. This was their road, she murmured, right under everyone's noses. Shadowmane pawed at the snow beside the track, his hoof striking a hard, rhythmic beat. His ears flicked forward, his nostrils widening as though sensing the same trail she saw in the churned ice. A few yards away, the beam of her flashlight snagged on something angular jutting from a drift. She trudged closer, heart pounding faster with every step. A wooden crate lay splintered open, half buried by snow and ice. The boards were rough-hewn, nailed hastily, but still bore stenciled letters, faded from transport. She crouched, tracing the marks with a gloved hand. Company names, addresses, none she recognized. And the ink bled under melted flakes until the words blurred into nonsense. Her hand brushed the interior, powder clung to her glove. Grey, fine, acrid. She sniffed cautiously. The odor stung her nose and coated her tongue with a bitter tang. Nothing like sawdust, not lumber. Her stomach sank. These crates were disguises, shells to move contraband unseen. Whatever powder remained here was residue, but enough to tell her Samuel's suspicions were right. This was no backwoods theft ring. This was organized, deliberate. She closed her eyes briefly. His voice echoed in her head. I saw them under the bridge. When she opened her eyes again, resolve burned behind them. The wind shifted. A sharper scent cut across the frozen air. Diesel. Claire stood, the beam swinging wide. It led her to a pile of rotting timber stacked against one of the bridge's supports. The wood looked abandoned, but the stench of fuel clung thick around it. She shoved one beam aside. Beneath it, half soaked in slush, lay a bundle of papers. She pulled them free, shaking snow loose. The ink had bled, smearing the print, but she could still make out the headers. Shipping invoices, transport manifests, seals of forestry companies. At first glance, they looked legitimate. But the addresses? She frowned, scanning line after line. None of them were real. The town names didn't exist. The numbers didn't match any timberline registry she'd ever seen. A veneer of legality covering hollow lies. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Whoever ran this ring had resources, planning, and no hesitation to kill an old veteran for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. She tucked the soggy papers into her coat, every instinct screaming to preserve them before they vanished into pulp. A sudden sound froze her in place. Shadowmane's head snapping upward, his ears pricked sharp, his whole body trembling like a bowstring pulled taut. His amber eyes flared in the dark, locking onto something she could not yet see. Easy, Claire whispered, but her hand was already moving. She killed the flashlight, plunging them into darkness. Her fingers found the cold steel of her sidearm, drawing it free with a whisper of leather. The night thickened. Snow hissed faintly as it fell. Somewhere beyond the timbers, the crunch of boots on packed ice echoed once, twice. Shadowmane blew hard through his nostrils, a guttural sound rumbling in his chest. Then he screamed, a raw, piercing whinny that reverberated under the bridge like a clarion call. His hooves hammered the frozen ground, thunderous and insistent, shaking the silence apart. Claire pressed her back to the wooden support, gun raised, her breath shallow. A shadow flitted through the darkness. A figure in a heavy coat, hood drawn low, slipping between the beams. The stranger froze as Shadowmane's cry shook the air, then bolted, boots striking frantic against the snow. "Stop!" Claire shouted, her voice sharp as gunfire. "Forest Service, freeze!" But the figure didn't slow. It darted toward the tree line, leaving a jagged trail of footprints deep in the snow. Within seconds, the forest swallowed them whole. Claire lunged a step forward, weapon trained, but knew chasing blind into the woods would be suicide. She let the barrel drop, her breath soaring harshly in her lungs. Shadowmane pawed furiously at the ground, his breath pumping out in heavy bursts. His body trembled with rage, his gaze locked on the direction the intruder had fled. Claire reached out her hand, brushing his mane. "Not tonight," she whispered, "but soon." The silence that followed pressed heavy around them. Claire stood still, chest heaving, the gun cooling in her hand. The smell of diesel clung to her nose, the weight of the damp papers heavy in her pocket. She forced herself to breathe, to let the night air cut into her lungs. Piece by piece, the truth assembled in her mind. Samuel hadn't been killed by chance. He hadn't been in the wrong place at the wrong time. He'd seen too much, and they had silenced him. Her jaw tightened, teeth grinding. She closed her eyes, seeing his face again, his trembling hand pressing the photograph of Anna into hers. His words rang like a tolling bell. "Don't let them take her. The horse knows the way." Claire lifted the gun, holding it steady before lowering it again. Her voice was low, a whisper swallowed by the storm. "You won't die for nothing, Samuel. I'll find the truth. I'll end this." Beside her, Shadowmane lowered his great head until his breath curled white into the snow. His eyes gleamed, sharp and alive, as though echoing her vow. Together they stood beneath the old bridge, ranger and horse, the only witnesses left to a crime carved into ice and silence. And both knew the storm was far from over. The morning after Samuel's death came cold and grey, the storm's fury broken but not gone. Snow still clung to the trees in heavy drifts, weighing their branches until they creaked like old timbers. The world looked hushed, stripped clean by the night's violence. But to Claire it felt more haunted than fresh. She had not slept. Hours had passed in a blur of questions, of vows repeated silently to herself as the dog tags and photograph pressed hard against her palm. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Samuel's blood spreading across the snow, heard his voice rasping through the storm. "Don't let Anna disappear. The horse knows the way." So she followed the thread he had left. Using his military ID, she pulled what little information she could from Timberline's sparse local records. A next of kin entry led her to a name, Anna Carter. No school enrollment, no medical files worth speaking of, only an address scrawled in county housing logs. It was barely more than a reference point, a footnote lost in the system. But it was enough. Now Claire guided her truck along a narrow path that barely deserved the name of road, Shadow Mane tethered behind on a lead. The horse moved with grim patience, hooves crunching through crusted snow, never faltering. He seemed to know where they were headed, as if the line of duty Samuel had spoken of passed through him as much as through her. The cabins here were relics, sagging against the weight of winters long past, their shingles curled, their chimneys silent. They squatted along the edge of Timberline's forest like forgotten teeth, half buried in drifts. Claire slowed as she passed each one, but she knew before she reached it which belonged to Anna. It was the loneliest. The roof sagged in the middle, where water must have pooled and frozen until the wood gave way. Boards along the siding had warped and blackened with rot, thin sheets of snow slipping through the gaps. No smoke rose from the chimney. The windows were fogged from inside, not with warmth, but with frost, their edges rimmed in opaque white. Claire parked and stepped out. The silence pressed down heavier than the cold. This was not a place a child should have been left to survive. Her chest ached. She touched the photo in her pocket, the face of a girl smiling faintly beside Samuel, her eyes bright despite the wear of age on the picture. "This is where you live, alone, sick, waiting for him." She forced herself forward, boots crunching on the frozen steps. She knocked. For a long moment, nothing stirred. Then from within came the faintest sound, wet, ragged, like the bark of a wounded animal. A cough. It grew louder, closer. The door creaked open an inch, then two. A thin face appeared in the gap. Pale skin stretched too tightly over sharp bones, lips cracked, cheeks hollow. Her eyes, large, dark, ringed with shadows, stared up at Claire with both suspicion and desperate hope. The girl couldn't have been more than 12. Her hair hung limp, a dull brown tangle against her narrow shoulders. Her small hands trembled where they clutched a photograph pressed against her chest. The same photo Samuel had given Claire, its edges frayed from being held too often, too tightly. "Anna?" Claire asked gently. The girl coughed in answer, the sound rattling deep in her chest. She pulled the door wider, just enough to reveal the rest of her frail frame. Her sweater was too big, sleeves frayed, fabric hanging off her like a borrowed thing. Her breathing rasped, uneven, as if each inhalation was a fight. But it was her eyes that struck Claire hardest. Fear lived there, yes, but also a fragile spark of recognition. A thread of hope reaching out to the green uniform and the badge on Claire's coat. "My grandpa," Anna whispered, her voice as weak as the wind seeping through the boards, her fingers tightening around the photo. "He said he'd come back." Claire's throat tightened. The truth pressed hot against her tongue, but she swallowed it. Not yet. Not like this. Behind her, Shadow Mane shifted, his presence filling the yard like a shadow drawn from memory. His hooves crunched as he stepped closer, snow scattering from his dark mane. Anna's head turned. The moment she saw him, everything in her broke open. Her eyes widened, then brimmed with tears. A choked sob burst free, raw and unguarded. She stumbled forward, clutching the photograph against her chest with one hand, while the other reached desperately for the horse. "Shadow!" Her cry cracked the air like glass. She threw herself against him, burying her face against his neck, fingers tangling in the thick, snow-dampened mane. Her shoulders shook violently with each sob. Shadow Mane did not flinch. He lowered his massive head until his breath rumbled warmly over her hair. His eyes closed halfway, lids heavy with a grief that mirrored her own. A low, resonant sigh escaped his chest, and he stood utterly still, a sentinel bearing her weight as if it were sacred. Claire felt the sting of tears burn behind her own eyes. The sight pierced her, raw and unrelenting. The bond was undeniable. Samuel, Anna, Shadowmane. 3 lives woven together, now torn, and she stood at the frayed end. She clenched her jaw, steadying herself. This is why he trusted me. This is why he gave me his vow. Anna, Claire said softly, stepping closer. I have something for you. The girl pulled back reluctantly, though her hand never left Shadowmane's mane. She looked up, cheeks streaked with tears, lips parted in shallow breaths. Claire knelt, rummaging in her pack. She pulled free the small bag she had bought at the gas station, the bag that Samuel had never lived to see. Inside, bottles rattled gently. She withdrew too, their labels clear and professional. This is real medicine, she said, her voice steady but kind. Cold relief, and here, she held up the other, this is for your lungs. It should help the coughing. But you need to take it properly, in the right amount. Understand? Anna's eyes widened further. She nodded, biting her lip. Her small, trembling hand reached for the bottle. She clutched it to her chest with both arms, as though afraid it might vanish if she blinked. Thank you, she whispered, voice breaking. Claire smiled faintly, though her heart twisted. You're welcome. You're safe now. We'll make sure of it. Inside the cabin, the air was stale and heavy, tinged with smoke from a fire long dead. Claire moved cautiously through the one-room home, her flashlight beam sweeping across rough furniture, scattered clothes, dishes crusted with dust. She stooped near the table where a blanket had been folded for a makeshift bed. That was when she saw it. A bottle, half hidden beneath the chair. She picked it up. The label was crude, a thin strip of paper poorly glued, the letters smudged by damp. Inside were white pills, but their surface glistened oddly, as though coated. Her gut twisted. She snapped one open between her gloved fingers. A slick residue oozed out, greasy and foul-smelling. Not medicine, not remotely. Her breath caught sharp in her throat. Someone had given these to Anna. Someone had put them here, disguised as help. Her hand clenched around the bottle. She shoved it into her coat pocket. It felt heavier than iron. The thought hit her hard, leaving her momentarily dizzy. Samuel had been silenced for what he'd seen. And now someone wanted Anna dead too. They hadn't been waiting for the sickness to take her. They had ensured it. Rage surged through her, hot against the cold pressing in from outside. You bastards, you tried to kill a child. She turned back. Anna sat curled against Shadowmane's flank, her small fingers buried in his mane. Her lips were tinged faintly blue, her chest rising with effort. But when she saw Claire, she managed a fragile smile. It struck Claire like a blade. This wasn't a case anymore. It wasn't about smuggling or evidence or paperwork. It was about a family shattered, a girl left in the dark, and a dying man's last plea. Samuel's voice rang in her head. Don't let Anna disappear. Claire crossed the room, knelt, and took Anna's thin hands in her own. The girl's skin was cold, but she clung tightly, eyes wide. Anna, Claire said firmly, you can't stay here. It isn't safe. Not anymore. You're coming with me. The girl's lips parted, trembling. But this is home. I know. Claire squeezed gently. But your grandpa wanted you safe. He trusted me, and I promise I'll protect you. With everything I have. Anna looked at Shadowmane. The stallion lowered his head, pressing his nose softly against her shoulder as though sealing the vow. Slowly she nodded. Claire moved quickly. She wrapped her scarf around Anna's neck, then pulled her own heavy ranger's coat over the child's shoulders. It dwarfed her, but at least it would shield her from the cold. Stay close to me, she instructed. Don't let go. Shadowmane followed silently as they stepped into the snow. His ears flicked, his eyes scanning the trees with weary vigilance. At the edge of the path, Claire stopped and looked back at the cabin one final time. Its walls sagged, its windows frosted over, its roof bowed and defeated. It looked less like a home than a mausoleum, a place where warmth had been buried long ago. Her chest tightened. Samuel, I promised. She won't die here. I'll get her out. She adjusted her hold on Anna's shoulder, then nodded to Shadowmane. "Let's go," she said. And together, ranger, child, and horse, they stepped away from the cabin, leaving its shadows behind, carrying with them the fragile thread of hope Samuel had died to preserve. The drive to the safe house stretched endlessly through the dark. Snow swirled against the truck's windshield, hypnotic in its constant sweep, but Claire forced her eyes to stay sharp. Anna slept against her shoulder, wrapped in Claire's ranger's coat, her breath shallow and uneven. Each cough rattled her thin frame, but the medicine had eased some of the weight from her chest. Shadowmane trotted behind on the lead line, tied to the truck's rear hitch, his hooves steady and certain on the frozen road. His silhouette rose and fell against the moonlight, as though he too bore the responsibility of the child sleeping in the cab. Hours later, through the curtain of storm, a glow appeared. Not the hard glare of gas stations or patrol floodlights. This light was warmer, softer. A safe house, nestled deep within the trees. A converted timber lodge, reinforced with federal steel, its windows glowing gold against the black woods. Claire pulled into the lot, tires crunching across packed ice. Officers moved instantly from the porch, rifles slung, faces shadowed under wool caps. One opened the door for her without a word. She gathered Anna in her arms. The girl stirred, coughing weakly, eyes half opening. The warmth spilling from the doorway met them halfway, thawing the night's frost. For the first time in days, Anna looked around without fear. She clung tighter to Claire, gaze fixed, as though she had found an anchor at last. Inside, the air was rich with wood smoke and coffee. The safe house's wide lobby smelled of pine and iron, a blend of comfort and authority. Men and women in federal jackets stood aside to let her pass, their nods acknowledging both welcome and urgency. In the command room, Claire met Marcus Hale. He stood straight-backed beside a table spread with maps, his presence filling the room as surely as the storm filled the woods outside. Early 40s, haircut close, eyes sharp enough to slice through pretense. His shoulders bore the weight of countless operations, yet he moved with calm precision. "Ranger Donovan," he said, his voice deep, controlled. "Marcus Hale, FBI." He extended a hand. Claire clasped it, the shake firm. His palm was warm, but his grip was iron. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Tell me everything." So she did. From the bridge to Samuel's plea, from the crates beneath the timbers to the false invoices she had stuffed into her coat. She recounted the sound of the gunshot, the blur of the fleeing truck, Samuel's dying words. Her voice caught once, but she forced it steady. Marcus listened without interruption, his face unreadable. When she finished, silence stretched a moment, then he nodded slowly, eyes narrowing at the mention of the bridge. "Timberline," he murmured. "We've had our eye on that route for months. Too many shipments, too many companies that don't exist. You were right, Donovan. It's weapons. Smuggled across state lines under the cover of timber." He folded his arms. "And Samuel Carter, he saw too much. That's why they killed him. To silence a witness." Claire's hand curled into a fist against the tabletop. She bit back the anger that surged. "I have proof," she said, forcing her voice steady. She reached into her pack and laid the evidence before him, one piece at a time. First, the splintered plank of wood, powder still clinging to its grooves. Then, the stack of sodden papers with addresses that dissolved under scrutiny. Finally, the bottle of pills, false medicine, slick with oil when broken. The room grew heavier with each item. Officers shifted uneasily, trading glances. Marcus examined them carefully, jaw tightening as he turned the papers over. His thumb traced the bottle's crude label, and his lips pressed into a hard line. "Not just weapons," he muttered. "They're covering their trail with poison, too. Killing anyone who might expose them. A veteran. A child." He looked up, his gaze like steel. "This isn't a smuggling run. It's a network. Well-funded, ruthless, and confident enough to plant evidence in a child's home." Claire's pulse thudded, hot in her ears. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Then we cut the network out at its root." Marcus straightened. His voice carried the quiet weight of command. "Bring the map," he ordered. Agents moved quickly, spreading a topographic layout of Montana across the table. His hand stabbed toward the northern edge of Timberline. There, he said, an abandoned sawmill. We've traced multiple shipments leading here. Intelligence says it's a staging ground, close enough to the border to move product fast. He looked up at the room. We hit it tonight, before they pack up and vanish. Claire's gaze shifted through the glass panel to where Anna lay in a cot, a medic checking her pulse. The girl clutched Shadowmane's mane like a lifeline, even in sleep. Claire returned her eyes to Marcus. Her voice was quiet but iron. I'm going. Samuel died asking me to protect her, and Shadowmane knows the path. Marcus studied her, weighing the resolve in her face. At last, he gave a slow nod. All right, but stay close. We can't afford missteps. Preparations fell into motion. Claire strapped into a ballistic vest, the weight pressing cold against her shoulders. She adjusted the holster at her hip, her hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Her breath came deep, deliberate, as though each inhale tamped down the fire boiling inside. Shadowmane was fitted with a light saddle, reflective tape affixed to the reins and stirrups so he would remain visible in the dark. He bore it without protest, standing calm, his amber eyes tracking every movement in the safe house. Anna sat wrapped in blankets, her cough softened by the medicine, her gaze locked on Claire. Fear flickered there, but something steadier too. Trust. Claire knelt beside her. She placed a hand gently on the girl's thin shoulder. I'll be back soon. And when I come back, you won't ever have to be afraid again. Anna's small hand shot up, clutching Claire's. Her voice was faint but certain. I believe you, and I believe Shadowmane. Claire's throat tightened. She squeezed back once, hard, then rose. The convoy rolled out in silence. Black SUVs slid onto the road, lights dimmed, engines low and deliberate. Snow crunched under tires, but the forest beyond remained hushed, as though the trees themselves were listening. Inside the lead vehicle, Marcus Hale sat with a headset, his eyes fixed on the map glowing faintly in the dashlight. Beside the convoy, Claire rode Shadowmane. His strides were powerful but measured, each hoof-fall a deliberate echo against the frozen ground. His ears swiveled, nostrils flaring as he tested the air. The stallion seemed to know his task. Lead, guide, protect. The night was thick, moonlight bleeding weakly through shifting clouds. Not even owls called, only the crunch of wheels and the rhythmic cadence of hooves marked their passage north. Claire sat tall in the saddle, the cold biting her cheeks. Her hand rested near the butt of her pistol. Every nerve felt stretched, tuned to the silence pressing against them. The forest waited. More than an hour passed before Marcus's hand shot up, signaling the convoy to halt. Engines dimmed to silence. The only sound was the settling of snow from tree branches. Before them loomed the sawmill. Its roof sagged under rusted tin sheets, walls scarred by rot, windows broken and patched with plastic. But from inside spilled faint yellow light, flickering across the snow. The thrum of an engine purred low, steady, mechanical. Voices carried faintly through the night, rough and hurried. They're moving cargo, Marcus whispered, his breath pluming white in the dark. Claire's eyes swept the building. A shadow passed across one window, then another. She leaned down, murmuring softly into Shadowmane's ear. The stallion flicked his ears forward, then snorted, shifting toward the mill's rear. His head jerked once, sharply, as though pointing. Claire followed his gaze. A trail of churned snow led to the back of the building. Tire ruts, a loading point. She turned to Marcus. That's their exit. He knows it. Marcus studied the horse, then nodded once. We'll split. Teams to the flanks. Cut them off from every side. Agents began to fan out, rifles raised, their boots silent in the snow. Claire stroked Shadowmane's neck, her voice low and fierce. Easy, boy. One more night. The stallion's muscles bunched beneath her, ready. Marcus Hale's voice cut through the radio hiss like a clean blade. Go. 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 Floods of white light lanced across the ruined yard as FBI teams surged from the tree line. Boots hammered the snow. Shouts snapped into the night. Federal agents. And then the sawmill erupted. Muzzles flashed inside the broken windows, bullets tearing splinters from the sagging walls. The first burst chewed a ragged line through a stack of pallets near the loading bay. A second stitched sparks across rusted tin. the air filled with a hard stink of cordite and old oil, and the sound so dense it pressed against the ribs. Claire moved with the right side assault element, hugging the shadow of a collapsed outbuilding. The world narrowed to breath, footfall, and the weight of her pistol. Splinters rained as a burst struck the corner ahead. She dropped behind a broken beam, snow dusting her hair, ears ringing. Across the yard, strobing beams cut the dark, agents peeling and covering, their voices clipped and practiced. Somewhere to her left, Marcus's team punched to the main door, shields up, shoulders locked. Shadowmane stood just behind the low wall where she tied him, neck arched, every muscle wired tight. He didn't rear or panic. He watched. The stallion's ears tracked the battlefield the way a seasoned scout might, nostrils flaring at each new rip of sound. When a ricochet moaned off the corrugated roof above, he dimpled the frozen ground with a hard stamp, as if to nail himself in place. "Right flank, with me," Claire called, her voice steady though her chest thudded. Two agents stacked on her shoulder. She rolled out and sprinted to the next cover. Rounds sparked a zipper across a steel drum inches from her ribs. She slid, breath punching from her lungs, then popped to one knee and sent two controlled shots through a dark shape in a window. The shape vanished. Inside, the saw buzzed to a stop. Orders barked in a different cadence now, men yelling to one another in the voice of habit and crime. Someone kicked open a side door, a rifle poked through and cracked. Snow hissed where a round skipped past Claire's boot. "Flash," an agent whispered, pin pulling with a tiny final sound. The grenade skipped across the threshold, bloomed white, and the room screamed light. The team flowed through the side door in one clean wave. Claire cut around the exterior, sensing the larger shape of the building, the currents of motion within it. She'd learned to read storms. This had the same logic. Pressure here meant vacuum there. A burst on the east wall meant a run to the west exit. She rounded the loading bay, hugging the wall, then stopped. Tracks in the snow, fresh, deep, pounding toward the rear office. She looked once to the yard, teams moving, suppressive fire stuttering, Marcus's voice calm and relentless, then slipped along the bay and reached the back door. The knob was warm under her glove. She eased it, breathed, and slipped inside. The old office stank of diesel and damp wood. A single work lamp cast a cone of dull yellow over open crates. Handguns packed in oiled paper. Ammo bricks, 3 black duffels yawning with magazines, and among them, turning with the fluid menace of a man who had never once believed he'd be cornered, a tall figure in a grease-stained leather jacket. A pale seam of scar ran from his cheekbone to the hinge of his jaw. His eyes flashed with the petty delight of the cruel. Claire knew him without thinking, the truck, the muzzle flame, Samuel falling. Her breath froze on the edge of a word and turned into steel instead. She raised her gun. "Drop it. You're under arrest for murder and interstate trafficking." The man smiled, an ugly private thing, and then drew a gleaming pistol from behind a crate and tilted it toward her as if the moment bored him. "The kid," he said, voice almost conversational over the gunfire beyond. "She was always going to die. You can't keep up forever." Claire didn't blink. Distance too close, angles bad. Her sight sat on his chest, his on her face. Either could fire and end the other. She felt the whole operation thinning to a single line, stretched to breaking in this one room. Something moved to her right, a shadow, shock black against the lamplight. The door frame exploded as Shadowmane hit it, shoulder first. The stallion's body filled the room in a violent rush, mane flying, hooves churning, the corded mass of his neck ramming the gunman like a battering ram. Leather and bone cracked together. The man's shot went wild, blasting a fluorescent tube overhead. Glass rained down like hard, bright snow. He cartwheeled into the crates, the pistol skittering beneath a pallet. Claire threw herself sideways as the ceiling hissed sparks. She slammed into the floor, rolled, felt the thunder of hooves stamp inches from her shoulder, controlled, not savage, then came up to a crouch, weapon snapped level. The gunman tried to rise. He got to one knee. His right arm hung wrong, a grotesque angle in the lamplight. He groped under the pallet with his left, fingers clawing for the pistol. Shadowmane planted both front hooves with a crack that shook the desk. The stallion's eyes blazed, breath bursting in white ropes. One more inch from the man's fingertips, and a hoof came down hard, pinning his sleeve to the boards like a nail. "Don't move," Claire said, voice all frost. She closed the distance, her boot sliding the pistol away. "It's over. He died because of you. The girl lives because of us." The man spit a curse, tried to wrench free, then sucked air as agony bit through his shoulder. He didn't look at Claire, he looked at the horse, some primitive calculation failing in his face. Outside, the firefight broke in stuttering chunks, the rhythm collapsing as teams cleared room by room. Boots pounded the hall. Marcus burst through the door with two agents stacked behind him, rifles trained and steady. He took in the scene in one glance, the crates, the weapon, the pinned man, the stallion standing like a statue carved from night. "Nice work," he said, gravel low with a wise look to Claire. To the agents, "Cuff him." They hauled the man flat and bound him, his curses thinning to a hiss. In the yard, voices rose clear. One last shot cracked, lonely as a popped string, then died. The safe sound came, radios feathering to routine, doors kicked open not in fear, but in inventory. Agents swarmed the warehouse floor. Under tarps and false bottoms, they found the rest. Pallets of rifles, crates of ammunition, grenades packed in grease, cases of explosives labeled as saw blades. The ledgers matched nothing and everything, a spiderweb of shell companies and dead roots. In the center of the floor, under the harsh cone of a work lamp, the truth lay naked and ugly. Marcus looked over it and nodded once. "This is done." Claire steadied a hand on Shadowmane's neck. Sweat and gunsmoke streaked her face. Melted snow trickled from her hairline. The stallion's coat was dusted with soot. His breath still came a little fast, but his gaze was level, satisfied. He turned his head until it brushed her shoulder, a weight and warmth that soaked through vest and jacket to rib and bone. "Good boy," she whispered, throat thick. "Good, brave boy." Outside, the wind shifted. The storm had passed. The sky above the roofline showed a thin seam of stars. News didn't take long to run the roads of Montana. By morning, radio voices spoke the words "federal bust" and "weapons ring." By noon, every chipped diner mug in Timberline had a story to pour into it. The bridge stopped creaking under rumor and started breathing again. For the first time in a long time, people crossed it without glancing over their shoulders. Claire kept patrolling. The forest still needed watching. Tracks still braided the snow where elk and men wandered. But the work had changed shape inside her. Where the duty had lived alone, it now had a companion. Anna. In a courtroom with wood-paneled walls and a flag that rustled when the heat kicked on, a judge read from a paper with tired eyes and a voice gentle enough for a child. Legal terms stacked like cordwood: guardianship, custody, best interest. Claire stood in her ranger's coat, hands steady at her sides. Anna stood next to her, a yellow scarf tucked beneath her chin, Shadowmane visible through the window beyond, head raised as if he could hear. "Do you want this?" the judge asked the girl. Anna's hand found Claire's and didn't let go. "She promised," she said softly, "and she keeps her promises." The gavel tapped once, paper became fact. Anna turned and wrapped both arms around Claire's waist. Claire folded her in and held on long enough to make something new in both of them. Shadowmane, as if on cue, blew a soft snort outside that fogged the glass. Timberline didn't turn wealthy overnight. It didn't need to. What it had, it shared. The town doctor stopped by with sample inhalers and a notebook full of hand-sketched schedules. The carpenter, who whistled through a gap in his teeth, brought a small desk and two chairs he'd sanded smooth as river stones. A rancher with hands like shovels stacked a shed full of hay and oats and said he'd trade for stories. Claire's cabin, once so quiet she could hear Thor drip through the eaves, found a new music. Pot lids clinked, pages turned, coughs softened, then eased. When the wind shouldered the walls, it no longer sounded like a threat. It was just weather on the other side of wood. Claire learned the rhythm quickly. Patrol at dawn, coffee steaming against the cold. Mid-morning lessons at the little desk by the window, Anna tracing letters with a careful finger while Shadowmane watched from the yard. Afternoons of fresh air and measured steps, steps to the fence, steps back, until lungs learned a new way to be brave. Every night before the lamps went out, Anna touched the locket she wore with her grandfather's face inside and whispered something only he could hear. More than once, Claire paused in a doorway and felt it, the exact moment a house stops being a shelter and starts being a home. Spring came by inches, snow retreated in scalloped edges from the roots of the pines. Water ran under the ice, then over it, then free. The sky found new colors between storms, soft blues and thin golds that made the world look rinsed and hung to dry. One morning, the field beyond the cabin glowed a tender green. The wind smelled like thawed earth and sun-warmed bark. Claire leaned in the doorway, arms folded, watching as Anna, sturdier now in her steps and brighter in her face, swung a leg over Shadowmane's back. The stallion lowered himself a little, patient as a teacher. Anna laughed, a real laugh, the kind that starts in the chest and lifts everything with it. "Ready?" Claire called. Anna turned, cheeks flushed, eyes alight. "Ready?" Shadowmane eased into a careful jog, then a crisp, easy lope, bunched muscles flowing under a coat that had found its shine again. His mane flew like a dark banner. His ears flicked back to catch the girl's small voice as she talked to him without realizing it. They moved together without fear, each making the other whole. Sunlight spilled over them and caught in the curve of a smile on Claire's mouth she hadn't known she could still make. She let it sit there, warm as the day. A gust lifted and fell. The grass shimmered. The horse, the girl, and the ranger formed a small, bright piece of the world, complete enough to hold off even the longest winter. Family, Claire thought, not the one you inherit, but the one you keep. The one you choose at a bridge in a storm, and hold to through gunfire and grief, and wake to again in the soft light of spring. Shadowmane slowed and turned, bringing Anna back toward the porch. The child's hand flashed in a wave. The horse's breath rolled out in a friendly plume. Claire lifted her palm in answer, heart quiet, vow kept. Behind them, Timberline breathed. Ahead of them, the season opened like a road. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out. Hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us.